address you as well, by the way. Professor Huemer.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know how this YouTube live thing works.
So basically, when you've got like Zoom Premium, you can just set it up through, like, they've got like an API integration with YouTube, and it just generates the link. So I can put that in the chat for you if you wanted to see it. And then basically, as people come in and watch, there's like a little chat bar to the side, and if they have like any questions or anything, they can ask them there. Though a lot of people are like in America as well, and I don't know what their kind of time zones and things are at the minute for coming in to watch.
Wait, am I going to possibly see questions appear in this Zoom chat window, or?
Yeah, no, they won't appear in the Zoom chat window, but they would appear on, if you click that YouTube link and you want to see them. But I can just kind of like, like make a note of any and filter them out for you at the end. Yeah. So would you want to kind of shortly introduce yourself and what you do, just for those people who might not know of you, though most people who are going to watch probably do?
Yeah, so I'm a professor in the philosophy department at the University of Colorado in Boulder. I've written a bunch of articles, like, about 70 academic articles in a variety of areas, including ethics, political philosophy, a lot of epistemology, and a small amount of metaphysics. I'm kind of big in the libertarian circles because of my book, The Problem of Political Authority, which is probably how most of my followers know about me.
So I was thinking in our kind of conversation today that we could touch on some of those areas, but I think the biggest one I wanted to sort of ask you about is the field of metaethics and some of your ideas around there. I spoke to Don Loeb a couple of months ago, and some of the people who kind of engage with the channel have been kind of thinking about, well, do we need like theism to be moral realists, or is some kind of non-theistic moral realism tenable, or is there even anything, do we even mean anything when we use moral language? Is there any ontology there to things? And your position is that you're a moral realist, right? Is that?
Yes, that's right.
And your book, Ethical Intuitionism, is mostly about how we know about morality, this idea of phenomenal conservatism. Do you want to kind of talk about what that is, and how we come to kind of know our morals? Like, I've got, sorry to kind of ramble on, but I've got this line from the book where you say, like, the opposite of phenomenal conservatism is self-defeating, something like that. And if you can kind of explain what it is and why that's the case.
Yeah. So phenomenal conservatism is a general view in epistemology. It's a general account of justified belief. So the view is that justification for belief is provided by appearances. Appearances are a type of mental state, which is not itself a belief, but it's the type of mental state that you're reporting when you say, it seems to me that so-and-so, or it appears that so-and-so. Okay. So the view is you're justified in thinking that things are the way that they appear to be, unless you have reasons for doubting that. And so there are a variety of different kinds of appearances. So your sensory experiences are a kind of appearance, whereby it appears to you that stuff is in your immediate physical environment. But also there are these intellectual appearances that you experience when you think about things intellectually, when you think about abstract questions, like it seems that the shortest path between 2 points is a straight line. This is an example of what philosophers call intuitions. And by the way, please do not confuse this with this sort of like popular, ordinary English maybe use of intuition. Does not refer to a supernatural faculty or whatever. It does not refer to, psychic powers or something. Okay, so intuition in contemporary analytic philosophy refers to something like this case where you think about an intellectual question and it seems a certain way to you. And that is independent of argument. That is, it's not that you have an argument by which you arrive at the conclusion. It's that just thinking about it, it seems a certain way to you. Okay, that's what we call an intuition. And so, okay, and what does this have to do with ethics? There's a particular class of intuitions called ethical intuitions, which occur when you think about some, ethically relevant situation. So you might think about some type of action and just have the reaction that it seems wrong or it seems right. So, or you think about some state of affairs and it seems good or it seems bad. So these are ethical intuitions. So if you're a phenomenal conservative like me, that means that you have a good account of how we have moral knowledge, or how we have justified beliefs in moral propositions. We're justified in believing that things are wrong when they seem wrong, and we don't have any particular reason for doubting that, right? And similarly for good, bad, and right, and other moral properties.
So sorry to interrupt, but what would you say then? Maybe like a kind of common sense type response here might be, well, many of the types of intuitions we have about the world are false, like science shows us or math shows us, when we reject certain principles, like the idea that parallel lines never meet, for example, and then we make great advances in physics when we reject these kind of intuitions. So there aren't good reasons for us to trust our intuitions. How would you respond to that type of argument that someone might raise or objection?
Yeah. So, just to clarify, like phenomenal conservatism is not the view that most appearances are true. All right, that's not the claim. The claim is it's rational to assume that things are the way they appear unless and until you have specific reasons for doubting it.
Okay.
Okay, so if you have reasons for doubting it, then, you should doubt it, right? It's only if you don't have any reason for doubting it, right? So I'm not saying that always believe everything that appears to be true, right? Okay, now, you might think, well, what if we just, if you just have so many cases of appearances not being correct, then maybe come to doubt the entire class, right? Well, you can't doubt appearances in general because whatever argument you're going to give is going to be based upon appearances, right? So any time that you, as you would put it, you figured out that things are not as they appear, the way that you figured that out was that you had other appearances that were not consistent, right? The first appearance wasn't consistent with some other appearances, and you decided that the second group of appearances was more reliable or something like that, which you decided on the basis of appearances, okay? It's all, that's the only thing that ever goes on, okay? You believe the thing that seems to you to be true. Okay, now, some people would say, yeah, okay, that might be true, but so there's this particular class of appearances, intuitions, which is less reliable than the other ones. Like maybe sensory appearances are more reliable than intuitions, right? And that might in fact be true, although it kind of depends on the intuition, right? So the intuitions that people have in mathematics, so the basis for all of mathematics, those seem to be highly reliable. The intuitions that people have in philosophy seem to be less reliable. Now, that doesn't mean, though, that you should just completely give up on philosophy. Oh yeah, just completely ignore it, right? I think many people have a problem of having a black and white worldview, where right. if A is less reliable than B, that means that we completely ignore A, right? Yeah, that's irrational. But it does mean that you shouldn't be super confident of your philosophical views. Right? And most ethical views you should not be super confident of, or particularly if there's controversy about it, you should not be super confident of it. But that doesn't mean that you should just be, a complete skeptic, right? There are some ethical views that I think are not controversial, and so you don't really have to doubt them, right? So nobody thinks that pain is better than pleasure. Right. So you can come up with some things. It's just that, these are things that people don't talk about a lot. But the reason we don't talk about them is that there's agreement. Nobody thinks you should just kill random people just for fun. Right. So, I'm highly confident that that's wrong. I'm not highly confident about whether abortion is right or wrong. Right. So like, you really should decrease your confidence. It really is less reliable if you have judgments that a lot of people are disagreeing with.
So a lot of the kind of arguments against moral realism seem to be almost epistemic in nature, or seem to be kind of to do with like moral disagreement or something like that. So how would you respond to if someone's saying there's so much moral disagreement that either if our intuitions about these things are so unreliable, would it just be to say, well, kind of like well, it's just like torturing babies for fun or something like that. It's just so obvious, like it's as obvious as 1 + 1 = 2, or is there kind of is there another layer of like inference in there or something?
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, as you're suggesting, like there's a popular argument where you appeal to the amount of disagreement in ethics. And part of what's going on there is that people are just focusing on the issues that we disagree about and just sort of like not talking about the issues that we agree about, because why would you talk about that? Okay. Right. But then you sort of like overlook the fact that there are substantial points of agreement. If you take a proposition like, oh, you shouldn't torture babies for fun. Yeah, I think that's about as obvious as 2 + 2 = 4. Right. I think like there's no reason for being skeptical about that unless you're skeptical about everything. Right. In which case, you should like probably have a self-defeating position. Whatever your reason for that is, you have to be skeptical of that too. Okay. Now, you might think, yeah, so, but there's still more disagreement in ethics than there is in most other areas that people study. I think that's true, right? I mean, there's a few areas where there's a lot of disagreement. Basically, philosophy in general and religion and morality, there's a lot of disagreement about. So what should we conclude about that? Yeah, probably on the issues that people are disagreeing about, you should have lower confidence than you would have on the issues where there's a lot of agreement. But I would point out that if you're going to draw a skeptical conclusion about this, it's kind of a self-defeating argument, because there's a lot of disagreement about metaethics too, right? Including disagreement about the argument from disagreement. So if you're going to say, we can't trust moral beliefs and philosophical beliefs, whatever, then we can't trust that claim itself right there. Yeah. So, but I mean, there are a lot of explanations for why people disagree about things. There are a lot of reasons why people disagree that are not because there are no facts, right? So like, you have people disagreeing about political issues a lot, which are connected to moral issues, but they will also disagree about purely factual claims that have to do with politics. So what that shows you is that people are not disagreeing just because there's no fact in the matter, right? So, like one example that I gave in the book was people disagreed about the Kennedy assassination, right? This is now so old news that maybe people don't know about it. But, there were people who think like it's completely 100% clear that there was a conspiracy. And then there are other people who think it's 100% clear that there was no conspiracy and it was just Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone and so on, right? Okay, and that's a good example because nobody thinks there's no fact of the matter, right? And also nobody thinks like it's inherently epistemically inaccessible, right? Nobody draws the conclusion that like assassinations cannot be known about or something like that. So, well, okay, there's just like a lot of stuff goes wrong in the human mind, and maybe people have a lot of biases. That might be what's going on there, and might also be going on in a lot of moral debates.
So if this is kind of what we, how we can know about our kind of own intuitions about morality, is there anything we can actually know about what kind of a thing it is that causes morality? Are there these Platonic forms that supervene onto situations, or is it, are there these divine command? Like, do we have to know anything further about what morality kind of is in its ontology, what goodness is, or something like that, to be able to say these intuitions are valid in any sense?
I mean, so first, nothing causes morality, right? It's like nothing causes the number 2. It's just there. Okay. Anyway, yeah, okay, but what is goodness? Yeah, I think there's think there's this quote at the beginning of Principia Ethica, G.E. Moore's book. It's just something like, everything is what it is and not another thing. I don't remember where he got that. And anyway, yeah, goodness is goodness. And Moore says something like that. Good is good. That's all I have to say about it. Now, a lot of people don't like that. But, let me sort of like explain that a little bit more. Is there a definition of good? No. So, and, is there a way of explaining what it means? Well, you can, like, if there's somebody who actually doesn't know the word, then yeah, you can say some stuff to explain it. A lot of the stuff that you could say is synonyms, like good means desirable, or positive, or has value, or something like that. These are all synonyms, but these don't really count as definitions in the sort of philosopher's sense. You can also talk about kind of like the implications of something being good, like if it's good, then there's a reason to promote it, okay? And so you can say a bunch of stuff that would help somebody understand what you meant by it, okay? But you can't really analyze it as what is good made of or something like that.
But does there have to be something, some goodness, something like that for this view to work? Because it seems to me like a lot of the arguments against it would be to say, that there's, or one argument against it would be to say, there's nothing like this that we know of that exists, and so it's probably all just some kind of biological illusion or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a sense in which there's nothing like anything else, right? Like there's a sense in which everything is different from everything else, and also a sense in which everything is like everything else. Okay, so, sometimes you think about value and you think, wow, value is weird. It's totally unlike everything that's not value, which is sort of true. But then, yeah, time is also weird. It's totally unlike anything that's not time. So maybe time doesn't exist. Okay, also space is really weird. And okay, also like matter is really weird, and energy is really like, if you like take any kind of large category of thing and compare it to everything else, it's like, wow, it's weird. It's unlike the other thing.
Yeah.
Okay, but anyway, you mentioned Platonism briefly. Okay, and basically, I am a Platonist about properties in general. That is, I think there are abstract objects which exist necessarily. Okay, but this isn't specific to value properties. This is all properties, right? So like 4 exists necessarily. Also, red exists necessarily. Okay, I just think like there are general arguments for this, that the abstract object exists and it's not reducible to something else. Okay, so like I think 3 is prime. I think that's a true statement. I think that's necessarily true. I think that for that to be true, 3 has to exist. So I think 3 exists. As far as I understand what it even means, that it exists, I guess.
So on your view, sorry, does the fact kind of exist as a thing as well? Or is it just that the reality is that there's this kind of like, there's 3 and there's primeness or something, and they're kind of a thing? Or is there some fact that's like this additional entity? Or is the fact just a description of reality?
Well, there is the fact that 3 is prime, right? So, with a lot of these, some of these metaphysical questions, does such and such exist? I feel like the question itself is kind of weird, right? And like, you're not totally sure what it means that the fact exists. Okay, but like, if I can figure out a way of saying what it means kind of clearly and having a kind of clear criterion for the thing existing, then it's just like obvious that it exists, okay? So like in metaphysics, a common thing to say is, well, okay, so it exists if there's a true statement where you have to interpret one of the terms in the statement as referring to that thing. Okay, so, or, as Quine famously said, there's a true statement where some of the variables in the statement have to be taken to range over this type of thing. So if you can make true statements where either a term or a variable has to refer to goodness, then goodness exists. right? And obviously you can, right? And the example of 3 is prime is an example of that, right? So 3 is prime is clearly a true statement, and the word 3 in that refers to 3, right? So 3 must exist, right? Or the one with variables is some numbers are prime, right? Which is for some x is a number and x is prime. And then what x has to range over there includes numbers, so numbers have to exist. Okay, so like if that's what it means, when you're asking whether numbers exist or whatever, then trivially they exist. Okay, and by similar arguments, goodness is going to exist and rightness and so on, right?
Okay, so just this is because I constantly have like a strawman dialogue, a strawman naturalist dialogue in my head that might be saying something like, why can't I just say unicorns exist or something like that? So just to maybe understand that position a bit better, why can we not just describe things into existence then on that view?
Yeah. So try. Let's try giving the argument, right? So try to make a true statement where one of the terms has to refer to a unicorn. Okay, so you might think somebody says, well, I don't believe in unicorns, right? And that's true. It's a true statement. It contains the word unicorn. Does the word unicorn there have to refer to unicorns? Right. And basically what people would say, which I think is basically correct, is it doesn't have to refer to unicorns. Right. So it means it can be paraphrased as something like, no horses have horns on them, right? I believe that horses do not have horns on their heads or something like that.
Okay.
And that's what it really means.
Yeah, I see what you mean. So if I because in the chat, some people are kind of talking about like something that's conceptually abstract, like I think the Java programming language is something that someone's like mentioned. It's like does Java exist? But it's like it depends what you mean by Java. It's like like that programming language exists, but if you're like trying to say because Java exists, there's like Java-ness, the form of Java-ness or something.
Yeah, I mean, does it, like in a normal context, if somebody asked, does it exist? I guess I would say yes. But also I go, wait, what do you mean? What do you mean by does it exist? Like, do people program in Java? Yes. So I guess it exists. Okay, but I mean, as some of these examples are illustrating, like the criterion for saying the thing exists is, it can get more complicated than the obvious, right? Because if somebody wants to say the thing in question doesn't exist, what they do is sort of like try to paraphrase the statement, right? I say, okay, there's this true statement where one of the terms appears to refer to 3. So 3 must exist. And then the response of a person who doesn't like the conclusion is going to be, oh, I can paraphrase the statement. So you don't have to have a term that refers to 3. Okay, now in that case, I don't know how you do the paraphrase, but in the case of the Java programming language, like maybe you can paraphrase statements about Java so that there doesn't have to be a term that refers to Java. Right? You can just like say some stuff about computer programmers and some stuff that the computer programmers are doing. And like, maybe there's a way of adequately doing that so that like you communicate everything that would be communicated using the word Java.
So for, I think maybe one of the reasons this view, a lot of people seem to see like they have to be naturalists or theists, right? And I think that this view, because it's like in this middle ground with these things that like aren't a part of naturalism, it can be quite alien to people. Would you say that is like the strongest argumentation you'd give for there being these kind of abstract objects, or are there like other things that might help people understand like what's led you to these conclusions about kind of Platonism being like metaphysically true?
Well, yeah, so I mean, that kind of raises the question about naturalism. I don't know. I guess abstract objects are not natural.
They'd exist in reality. Yeah,
I feel like I'm not sure what natural means at this point. Like, okay, how about the property of having mass? Is that natural? So I guess mass is a natural property, but like just the abstract object having mass, that's a universal. It's not a physical object, I guess. So anyway, but it's not supernatural, right? So, and the value properties are not supernatural. They don't require God or whatever. And by the way, this might be going into a digression, right? But
it's all right.
why does anybody think that realism has anything to do with theism?
Yeah.
Okay. So the answer is there's a particular view, a particular theological view called the divine command theory, where obligations are generated by commands from God and only by commands from God, right? People with a strong version of this view think, all moral properties are just reducible to facts about God's commands. Okay, but I don't think that's that natural of a view. I think that there have been many societies throughout human history that had moral norms, and of them, a very small minority thought that had something to do with God's commands, right? Because in fact, most of them were not even monotheistic. Okay, so, and also, by the way, that is not by any means an uncontroversial view, even in Christianity, right? So if you look at the Catholic Thomistic view, their view is that God commands things because they're right, not the other way around, right? Okay, but anyway, so that's a possible view. It's a possible view about why we'd have moral obligations, but it's actually, besides the fact that a lot of people have not held that view, and you should not assume that. Besides that, it's it's a weird view, right? So there's a really powerful person who tells you to do stuff, and then what? Then you have to do it. Why? Okay, and then you could say something like, well, you have to do it because he's all good or morally perfect or something like that. No, you can't say that if you're trying to give a foundation for value properties, right? You can't appeal to value properties. So you just have to say, you're trying to explain why anything has any value properties. So you can't invoke the value properties. So you just have to say, so God has these non-evaluative properties. So there's a being who has these non-evaluative properties. He's super powerful and super smart and knowledgeable, and he tells you to do something. And then that's supposed to give rise to an obligation to do it. No, why? Right? Suppose that this super powerful being tells you to go and murder your son, right? As supposedly happened when Abraham was told to murder Isaac. Okay. And by the way, I guess when you read that part of the Bible, you're supposed to think, oh yeah, so good, he should murder his son. But that's obviously wrong, right? Okay, anyway. Okay, now going back, but you might think, yeah, but if we don't have God, then how can there be any basis for objective values? Okay, by the way, if you think that morality is based on God, that's not objective, that's subjective, right? Because what you're saying is that the value facts are dependent upon the attitudes of this particular observer, right? You're saying there has to be a person who has some attitude or, takes some action or something to make something right or wrong. Anyway, okay. Yeah, but still, how could there be objective values? Well, how could there be objective anything without God? I don't understand. I don't understand how this.
What about? Sorry to when people, rather than reducing them to the commands of God, maybe the commands, the normative aspect, but goodness itself is in God's nature, as the pure actual being or the highest form or something like that. What those kinds of views that are saying goodness is in this thing, but then because it's relational, it's given us certain commands that might apply in certain times and things. Does that approach require some different objections from?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure I understand that, right? So there could be a being who is extremely good, but the property of goodness, okay, the property of goodness could be in a being in the same way that's in you and me, right? Namely, you could be good, and I could be good, whatever. So goodness is in us, the way this pen is red, so there's redness in it, and
right.
Okay, yeah, it could be in it in that sense, but if there's supposed to be some stronger sense, I don't think I understand. I think it's maybe a category error. right?
Okay.
Like the, I mean, I think there's a confused view where you sort of like treat the abstract object like a concrete object, right?
Okay.
Like, which by the way is the picture of, this might even be Plato's picture, right? The picture of the Platonic forms, right? Like there's some particular object, like the form of man is like this really perfect man or something like that. Yeah, that's very confused, right? It can't be a particular object like the rest of us, like all these ordinary objects around us. Okay, but so I started to say something before about, yeah, so many people think, I guess, that there's a problem with morality being objective without God, and that, you know, God would make it objective, but not having God makes it not objective. And I don't understand this. I don't understand why people say that about morality and they don't say that about anything else, right? So like, I never heard anyone say physics can't be objective without God, or mathematics can't be objective without God, which, you know,
You've
might
not
be.
spoken to presuppositionalist apologists then. Have you ever come across that at all?
I'm not sure.
So like Greg Bunsen or Van Til or anyone like along those. They say I'd say it's a big question bag, but they essentially say, well, for you to even you know, use your own reasoning to have rationality, to you know, you need to assume you need to assume theism basically to begin with. So they would be saying that they'd be saying they just presuppose theism and the conditions you'd expect in a theistic universe. But I mean, I kind of think it's question begging. But
yes, well, seems not true. I mean, so, you know, like there's this argument where people say, in order to think that your cognitive faculties are reliable, you have to think that they were created by God or something like that. Which, you know, that's something like Descartes' view, by the way, all the way back at least to Descartes. And then, you know, there's arguments like this in Plantinga. Anyway, yeah, I don't think that, but I think that's sort of like a different issue. You know, what's wrong with that argument? There's just a thing where people say, there are people who just think that ethics specifically can't be objective without God. And I have no idea why they think that. It's like, I have no idea how that's supposed to be different from any other subject matter. And nobody says that about other subject matters. Nobody says like, yeah, geometry can't be objective without God. Like God has to state the geometrical facts or something, or there won't be any facts. Like, no, I don't know. Anyway, yeah.
So then, what do you kind of? I'm guessing then, as a Platonist, could you go into those ways that your Platonism is different from that kind of like ancient classical Platonism then? Because I would say that Plato, you know, does posit a kind of theism with that form of the good, and like you were saying about maybe he's thinking, how does this modern type of thinking about it differ from that more kind of ancient time or Neoplatonism adopted by like someone like Augustine or whatever?
Yeah, I mean, so, like the most obvious confusion in Plato is it appears that he thinks the forms are like perfect exemplars of the properties that they're the forms for, right? So like there's a form of circularity, which is like this super perfect circle existing like in another dimension or something like that. And that's confused. There's a property of roundness, but it's not a circle. It's not like there's a perfect circle somewhere. In fact, that's a category error. It's an abstract object. So like, it doesn't itself have a shape, right? Like it's the property of circularity, but it is not itself circular. Right? Like, so, you know, properties don't instantiate themselves. They don't have themselves. Right? The property of redness doesn't possess redness. It just is redness. Okay. And so, you know, there's the famous argument in Aristotle called the third man argument, which is supposed to refute the theory of the forms, right? And it's like, suppose there are these, according to Plato, if there are two men, then there has to be this form of man to explain what the first two men have in common. And then it looks like he thinks the form of man is a perfect exemplar of manhood or something. So then there has to be another form-like entity to explain what it has in common with the ordinary men. And then you just get this infinite regress, okay?
Right.
But, you know, even never minding the infinite regress, just like when you have that first stage, you can already see that that's confused, right? There's something has gone wrong there. And what's gone wrong there is thinking that the form is like a man, right? It's just like, it's an abstraction. It's the set of properties. It's not itself a man, right? Like existing in some weird other dimension.
I mean, I think a tendency from people who would struggle with this view would be to say, well, what that abstraction really is, though, is like a product of our mind or a product of our consciousness. You know, what we're doing is we're looking at these things and pulling that abstraction out in some sense as we kind of pass the world up into some coherent thing. But I mean, where are you? I can't think of a good way of phrasing the question. Like, where are you saying the forms live, so to speak?
Yeah. Nowhere. I mean, so like it seems really weird. Like the forms seem really weird to you if you're thinking of them as being like physical objects, right? Like,
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's a physical object, but it's ghostly and it's in another dimension or something. And it's just not, okay? And you know, you need to not try to imagine them because they're like, they don't look like anything, right? And the way that you're aware of them is just through your intellectual understanding. Okay, but anyway, so a view that I guess some people have had was, yeah, maybe it's just sort of like all in our minds, right? And there's something that's in your mind, right? There's something that your mind is doing that's sort of like an arbitrary selection, but, or well, not arbitrary, maybe a non-arbitrary selection, right? But you know, you get to choose. We have these words and we get to decide what the words are going to be and we get to decide what they're going to mean, stuff like that, okay? But there's also something that's in reality, right? So like, you know, there were red things before there were people, right? Right? Or to avoid debates about secondary qualities, let's say, there were planets before there were people, right? So like our mind didn't create the planets. Like, you know, the earth existed for billions of years before people existed. So we didn't create the earth. We did create the word earth. And I think that like, there's just like a lot of, you know, super basic confusion. The fact that we created the word earth or we created the idea, the concept of the earth or something. People confuse that with thinking that we created the earth or something. So there are aspects of reality that are out there that are independent of us, which include these abstract objects, including, you know, properties and relations, types of things. And, you know, the work of the mind and language is to pick out which ones we want to talk about, like pick out which ones we care about, and we give them names. But there are lots of properties that don't have any names because like we humans don't care about them, okay? Right, so it's like there's a job for language and the mind to do. It's not creating things though. It's selecting things out for attention.
And how would you say that we can actually differentiate between like abstract objects and physical objects as well? So if, and I suppose the person who's asked this question in the chat wants you to kind of describe a method if possible. But when I was thinking about their question, I was thinking, you know, in terms of if both appear before the eye, as it were, as kind of this qualitative experience, how do we decide behind which one? How do we decide between which one is like a thing in the world and which one's like an abstract or a participation in an abstract?
Yeah, I mean, you know, abstract objects don't appear before your eye, right? That is, your awareness of them has to be conceptual. The way that you're aware of an abstract object is you understand a concept. Okay, now, well, so the question was something like, how do I know if something is abstract? But maybe I should say something about like what it means. It's abstract or concrete. Right. So one of the things is, okay, some things are in space, and some of the things are not. Like, this pen has a location and a size and a shape, but property of redness doesn't have a location or size or shape. Right. The red pen has a location, but the redness doesn't have a location. Okay, another thing is the abstract objects I'm talking about are typically things that could be instantiated by particular things and not vice versa. So like the property of redness can be a property of multiple things, but a particular object cannot be a property attributed to multiple things. So like the pen cannot be ascribed to multiple things. It's just, one thing itself. Redness can be present in multiple different things, and that's characteristic of abstract objects.
So like why would there not be like penness that pens participate in?
Yeah, the property of penhood or whatever,
Yeah.
That's abstract. So there are multiple instances of that. There's only one of this pen, right?
Okay.
So this pen is a particular. Penhood is an abstraction.
Okay, sure. So, in terms of, would that be the main kind of reason, the main ways you differentiate from like Plato, so to speak? Then, or are there any other?
Yeah, I mean, I guess my difference from Plato is the so-called self-predication assumption, right? The idea that the abstract object instantiates the property, right? Like that property of penhood is a pen. I think that's the main difference I have from Plato. I don't know if he exactly thought that. I think like he was sort of just a little confused. So like if you'd made it very clear to him, maybe he would have realized that was a mistake.
So is your view then also different from Aristotle's kind of a view of it being in the thing as well in some ways?
Yeah, I mean, like the way that people think of it in contemporary metaphysics, I guess, is, Platonism holds that the abstract objects exist necessarily. So even if there are no instances, like,
okay.
So if somebody destroys all the pens in the world, there will still be the property of penhood. And the Aristotelian view is that they only exist in the particulars. So if you destroy all the pens, then you destroy penhood.
Right.
Okay. Now, I mean, again, it's a little bit of a weird question, right? You start to think, I mean, at least I start to wonder if I really know the substantive difference between those views, right? Like, okay, we've agreed all the pens have been destroyed. We agree that there used to be pens. We agree that there aren't any pens now. We agree that it's possible for there to be pens. Like we could agree on all those, and then there's still supposed to be a debate. Yeah, but does penhood exist? And I'm not sure what that means. Okay, but like a way of explaining what that means is, going back to the earlier idea, it means, well, you could have a true statement where there's a term in it that has to refer to penhood, right, in order to explain how the statement is true. Or there's a variable where penhood has to be within the range of the variable. I don't have a good example of the statement right now, but I don't think it would be hard to find that, right? Mm-hmm. Right, so, yellow is a color. Okay, so like there's a true statement, obviously, and it appears that the subject term has to refer to an abstraction, right? Refer to the property of being yellow, right? And so yellow exists. And notice that that's going to be true even if you destroy all the yellow things. Like all the yellow things suddenly disappear, but it's still going to be true that yellow is a color, right? Rather than a shape or a size or something like that. Right? So looks like yellow still exists.
So possibly to shift gears slightly, is there anything else you want to say on that topic before I kind of throw in a question that might divert us away from kind of Platonism, metaphysics, and stuff like that?
Yeah, no, let's go ahead and switch.
So how does this view then of kind of ethics and morality, how does that influence like your sort of normative stance on certain topics, or your applied set? So like so you, in terms of like being libertarian or in terms of veganism, those are two stances that you hold, which I'm sure have, you know, other arguments. But first, to kind of like bridge that gap from the sort of abstract thinking into, you know, like how do we actually live our life and stuff? How does this view of morality inform your decision making when it comes to these particular things?
You should say, I mean, like the business about Platonism doesn't have much effect on anything. But I think Platonism is basically just like implied by any view. like I think, you know, I think the view that this pen is red entails Platonism. So, okay, but so like you can't derive what, like, you know, any non-trivial moral recommendations from it. Okay, but you know, there are effects of the epistemological view, right? So like, you know, given my view about how we know about ethics, and I think this should be kind of trivial, but anyway, my view is the way that you proceed in ethics is you start from what seems correct, you know, and as long as you don't have a reason for doubting it, you just go with that, right? So, and in particular, like we start with the things that seem right or seem wrong to the vast majority of people. And like sort of like especially things that seem clearly right or clearly wrong. Okay, now, you know, why I'm an ethical vegetarian is, well, you know, it seems to me like pain is bad. And it seems to me like you shouldn't cause a large amount of something bad for the sake of trivial benefits for yourself. Like, and those two normative judgments seem to me like about as obvious as anything. Right? Like, if you don't agree with that, then I don't know what value judgment you could agree with. Okay, and you know, it just happens that factory farming is causing an enormous amount of pain and suffering for the sake of very much smaller benefits for us. So it's just like hard for me to see how you could possibly think that this was okay, right? Like, you know, how could that be good?
I mean, does it kind of come down to like, would there be some like consequentialist calculation someone could do where they say, well, I don't know this, I don't know enough about any of these facts, so don't take them as an actual argument. But like hypothetically, if someone could say, you know, the suffering caused by if everyone switched to like a plant-based diet would be more than the suffering of these animals or something like that.
Yeah.
Is it this kind? Does it boil down to like a consequentialism in a way, or is it?
Well, I mean, so first, like, I don't know how that would be. Like, the person be saying, "Oh, it's just so painful to not eat meat. It's just like it's like worse." You know, refraining from meat is worse than like you know, having body parts chopped off and living in a tiny cage, whatever. Anyway, but yeah, is a consequentialist argument. Well, I mean, yes and no, right? So, it's well recognized in ethics and political philosophy that everybody has a role for consequences, right? Like, I mean, a view that says that consequences never matter is just insane. And like, nobody holds such a view. Okay, so like, so I mean, I'm just assuming that you shouldn't like inflict severe pain and suffering for trivial reasons. You don't have to be a consequentialist to think that, right? Like most deontologists would also agree with that. Like if you're a deontological rights theorist, you would also probably agree with that. If you're a virtue theorist, you would probably also agree with that. Like it would just be an insane view to think like, no, cause any amount of badness just for the hell of it, right? Or just for minor reasons. Okay, so I mean, in non-consequentialist views, it's typically accepted that you shouldn't cause lots of bad consequences for no good reason. What will happen is just that they will have constraints. Like sometimes you can't bring about a better consequence because it's violating somebody's rights, right? Which will also involve doing something negative, okay? But you know, it's not like being a vegan will be violating anybody's rights, right? And it's not going to be violating any other deontological principles that people believe in either. So,
So some people have got a kind of some questions then around like, firstly, more philosophically, your thoughts around the kind of Sam Harris view of pain. You know, like essentially defining badness as the worst possible thing that we could imagine experiencing, and we can all agree on that. And then saying, well, not that is good by definition. And then there are some other questions I think about, like Descartes or C.S. Lewis saying like animals don't feel pain or whatever. If you want to go down the first question first, and then I can.
Yeah. So I mean, I don't know the Sam Harris thing that you're referring to, but that sounded like a confusion. I mean, so you imagine the worst pain that you can imagine, and it's clearly bad. Okay, yeah, but it's not the case that everything else is good. It's like there could be more than one thing that's bad, right? So like just not having that is not necessarily good. Okay, but I mean, like I think what's right is you can get a general agreement on if you clearly, vividly imagine severe pain or suffering, you can get a clear agreement among like any normal, sane person that it's bad. And therefore you have a reason to prevent it. Okay, it's not necessarily dispositive because like there could be reasons for inflicting pain if it somehow prevents something else that's bad. Like maybe I have to inflict pain on this creature in order to prevent worse pain or prevent pain for a larger number of creatures or something like that. That's always possible, right? But it's just that, yeah, but don't do it for no reason, or don't do it for the sake of just much smaller reasons, right? Like don't inflict the severe pain for the sake of a trivial pleasure, right? Like, come on. Sorry, what was that second?
The second one was just kind of, a lot of, especially theistically motivated philosophers, where the kind of theological axioms would be, well, humans have a soul, animals don't, kind of thing, or animals don't feel pain. Or...
Yeah, I mean, Descartes apparently thought that animals are non-conscious, non-sentient, like they're just mindless mechanisms. But basically, like no sane person thinks that, right? That's just like a crazy thing that somebody said a few hundred years ago. Maybe it was, I don't know, maybe it was less crazy in his time or something. Why do we think animals experience pain or other experiences, right? Well, they act as if they experience pain, right? Act in the way that you would act if you had pain. Like, sometimes they scream, they try to get away, whatever. They try to avoid doing the thing that caused pain in the past. Also, they have physiological structures that would explain why they would have pain. So like the nerve cells that send pain signals in you, most animals have them. A lot of animals have them. Actually, not all, not 100% of animals have them, right? So insects apparently don't have these nociceptors, as they call them. All right, so insects probably don't feel pain. Okay, but also there's the stuff going on in your brain, and similar stuff is going on in the brains of the cows or the pigs or whatever. So like if you're going to say maybe they're just mindless mechanisms, I could say, well, maybe other people are just mindless mechanisms, right? That is conceivable, but should I go out and start torturing people because there's like, a non-zero probability that everybody else is a mindless automaton? No, I should not do that. Yeah, about having a soul now, like I'm not completely sure what a soul is, right? And I'm not completely sure if anyone has them. Okay, but so, is it compatible with having experiences like pleasure and pain and happiness, fear, sadness, whatever? Is it compatible with all that you don't have a soul? So if that's compatible, then I don't know why a soul matters. If it's not compatible, then I would say, okay, then the animals have souls. Now, in Christian doctrine, the non-human animals don't have an immortal soul. Like we know that. So like, I understand this view, like after you die, maybe you go to heaven or hell, but the animals don't. Like, I guess that's the traditional Christian view, but that wouldn't explain why it's okay to torture and kill the animals.
Yeah.
In fact, if anything, that would make it worse. It would make it worse to kill an animal, right? Because it doesn't have an afterlife. But if you kill a human, then they go to heaven. Or at least I hope most of them go to heaven. So, it's like this would make it way less bad to kill a person.
So to ask a specific question then, I suppose, about veganism would be, it seems like there are many animal products, like say eggs, which are just like would be just going to waste otherwise from the chickens who are alive, or maybe some dairy products and things. Is your argument along the lines of that our demand for it creates, people then exploit animals, which leads to their suffering because we're trying to produce so much of this stuff? Or why veganism as opposed to vegetarianism on the kind of applied?
Yeah, I mean, they're clearly raising more chickens in order to provide all the eggs that people want, right? I mean, there's cruelty involved in basically every aspect of the animal agriculture industry. You might you're tempted to think, oh, well, we'll just use the parts that, if we just take the eggs or the milk, they're producing that anyway. And so but no, I mean, the reason why a certain number of animals get raised and then sort of tortured is that there's profit in it. And so the role of buying the milk or the eggs is the same as the role of buying the meat. It plays the same role in the system. Okay. Namely, it provides the profits that are the incentive for the people to do all that stuff.
And does that, in a way, kind of, I mean, I'd like to also get into the kind of libertarian stuff, but are there some kind of contradictions there between, the market should be able to kind of do it, or are you're saying ethically this is wrong, like people can do what they want, but what people want to do is sometimes wrong? Is that?
Well, I mean, so second part of that is true. People often want to do things that are wrong. Sometimes the wrongful things that people want to do, other people shouldn't interfere with, right? But I mean, I think you're raising the question about, usually libertarians believe in letting the free market work or something, and things will work out well. And that is true in most cases, but it's not like a law of nature. There can be cases where kind of free market operation leads to bad results. And why could that happen? Basically externalities. Right? So there are cases in which some business or whatever, some economic activity has negative effects on third parties, where the people who are producing those negative effects don't have to compensate for them. And then you get bad outcomes. Okay, right. So sometimes the third parties are humans, but sometimes they could be members of other species, right? Okay, so a classic example is pollution. So you have a business that's producing a bunch of pollution in the course of producing a valuable product, and then the consumers buy the product. And you think, oh yeah, so the market is working well. Yes, but what about the pollution thing? And that pollution could be harming other people who are not consenting, right? They don't have to consent, and the polluter may not have to pay compensation unless there's a law that requires that, right? So then there's going to be overproduction of the pollution. Okay, and in the meat industry, in case it's not completely obvious, I'm saying the third parties who are suffering are the non-human animals, right? It's like a vast externality, which is many times greater than the total benefit of the industry, right? And nobody has to compensate the animals, nobody's getting their consent or whatever.
But so it kind of seems to me like that might be, that kind of argumentation might be in favor of government regulation though, and things. And maybe before going down that particular route, do you want to kind of define what libertarian is and means? And then maybe we could address some of the kind of questions of what are the kind of pros and cons, and what are the outcomes of that kind of politics?
Well, I mean, so if somebody actually doesn't know what libertarianism is, the best way to explain it is probably to talk about what libertarian policy views are, right? Libertarians support just much smaller government, or extreme libertarians are actually anarchists. So, they want to no minimum wage laws, right? Remove most social welfare programs, or maybe all social welfare programs, right? The government should only be in the business of protecting us from criminals and hostile foreign governments, right? And by criminals, I mean people who are trying to like physically harm you or your property or commit fraud or something like that. So roughly that is said. Now, to give like a completely accurate characterization, you have to get complicated, okay? But like, for example, the drug laws would be repealed in the libertarian world. Prostitution would be legal. Also, right to own a gun. Everybody could own whatever gun they wanted, right? And then, okay, and like there would be much lower taxes because like we would cancel Social Security and cancel Medicare and stuff like that, just all be privatized. Okay, now what these positions have in common, like there's controversy among libertarians about like what is the underlying principle that explains why you should hold all these positions, right? My view is the underlying idea is skepticism about authority, right? That is what's really distinctive about libertarians as compared to people with other political views is, we just don't see why 535 people in Washington have special rights to tell everybody else what to do, and like why we have to obey those people, right? Like we don't understand why they have authority, in other words. Okay, and so, how does this connect to all those policy views? Well, like all of these things that the government is doing that the libertarians don't like and that most other people like are things that you would not accept anybody else doing them. Like if a private party tried to do any of these things, you'd say, no, you can't do that. So like if I decide I'm going to prohibit drugs, like I'm going to produce a list of substances that I say are bad for you and that I say you're not allowed to ingest. And then if you ingest any of them, I'm going to send armed guards that I've hired to your house to kidnap you, right? And then I'm gonna lock you in a cage for like years at a time. If I did that, anybody would say that I was a horrible person, right? I should not be allowed to do that. And then, they would like just set up some vigilantes to stop me and so on. And so I just think you should have the same reaction to the government doing that. Right? And that results from the fact that I just don't understand how the government is special. Like, I don't see how they have the right to do a bunch of stuff that nobody else would have the right to do, right?
So that,
and like, you can make a similar point about these other. You make a similar point about these other programs, like, say I'm running a charity to help the poor, and I'm not getting enough voluntary contributions, so I decide to take some non-voluntary contributions. And like I go to people's houses and I say, okay, you have to give me this amount for my charity. If you don't give me the amount that I say, then I'm going to kidnap you at gunpoint and lock you in a cage, right? I can't do that, right? So since I can't do that and you can't do that, I don't understand why the government should be able to do that.
Is a lot of this kind of predicated on the non-aggression principle?
Well, sort of. It's predicated on common sense morality, right? Okay. What I think I'm doing is just applying the ordinary ethical intuitions that almost everyone shares, except I'm applying them to the state. Like most people apply these intuitions to ordinary private individuals and they just for some reason refuse to apply them to the state. Okay, so one of these things is, aggression is bad. Like, generally speaking, don't use force against other people or don't threaten to use force against other people, and like also don't take their stuff and so on. But I'm not saying that it could never be justified, right? So like some libertarians have this very doctrinaire kind of absolutist view, like, threatening force, initiating force against people could never be justified. I don't think that, but I think you need a good justification. And what I think is it would be justified for the state only under the conditions under which it would be justified for other agents, right? And that's all you need to assume, right? Because the things that we're saying the government shouldn't do, there's widespread agreement that nobody other than the government should do them. Right, so I don't have to have a strong version of the non-aggression principle. I just have to have like the common sense version, like don't start aggression without a good reason.
I mean, I think I definitely find myself agreeing in principle with libertarianism, but I think something I find is maybe there are some goods that come about from having government, or maybe some evils that are avoided by, like saying that in that particular example, maybe regulations around farming could could avoid animal suffering in a way that just leaving the market to decide and profit might not, or something like that. Or maybe the byproducts of free university education for people up to a certain age outweigh the harm done by taxing people at a certain amount or something. Is there like a general way you'd respond to that type of thing, or would it be like on a particular case by case basis?
Yeah, I mean, so like the class of arguments is government doing something will cause much greater benefits than harms. And then, is that justified? Right? And my general approach would be, okay, well, just pretend that we're talking about somebody other than the government. And if it's completely clear that they would not be justified, then the government also isn't justified. Right? Now, there could be some cases where this won't answer the question because it will be unclear whether somebody else would be justified. Okay, but yeah, so like I think there are, I think this thing that I'm saying about lack of authority, it does not entail anarchism. And like I have to be clear about this because like everybody thinks that, oh, I just asserted anarchism, which I didn't, right? What I'm saying is the government shouldn't do the things that wouldn't be justified for anyone else to do. That doesn't entail they shouldn't do anything, right? So like if there's a murderer who's running around, I think it's fine for anybody to stop that person, including the government, right? And if nobody else is doing it, then the government should do it, right? Okay, but anyway, and so a possible role for the government is dealing with negative externalities. So cases where like, yeah, there might be two people who are engaged in a transaction that's consensual between themselves, right? But they're having negative impacts on third parties whose consent they did not solicit, right? And they're not compensating the third parties. And so I think that's a reasonable time for the government to get involved, right? Now, one of your examples was, well, what about the government providing education for people? Yeah, I don't see why they have to do that, right? So like, I mean, that doesn't fall under the negative externalities thing. And if you think about, well, suppose that I want some people to be educated. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna like mug people on the street in order to get money and then give that to people so that they can go to school. No, I can't do that, right? Cannot do that.
What one question in the chat around this is saying the social contract is the basis for the government having like a special kind of authority. What are your thoughts around like the social contract or social contract theory?
Yeah, I mean, that would be great if that was true, right? The only problem is just being factually false, right? And by that, I mean, well, they never asked for our consent. We never made that agreement, right? Like nobody can show me this contract. Okay, and by the way, they could try to do this. So like, the IRS sends out tax returns every year. With the tax return, there could be like, maybe there could be like, they could add a line to it that says, I agree to have a government, yes or no. And then if you check no, you get a refund of all your taxes and then they leave you alone. Okay, they could do that. And then if they did that and you checked yes, then you have a contract, right? Okay. But you know why they're not doing that? Everybody knows why they're not doing that, right? Because too many people would check no, right? If you get your taxes back when you check no, then a lot of people would check no. That's why they're not doing it. Okay, that's not legitimate, right? You can't say like you have an agreement where you refuse to ask the people if they actually agree because you're afraid they would say no, right? Like that's not how contracts work. But there's a lot of there's sort of like more discussion of this in my book in The Problem of Political Authority I think in chapter 2.
Okay. So someone has mentioned that Steven Pinker gives an argument that government use of the monopoly of violence actually reduces violence overall. I don't know if I'm not, so I don't know if you're familiar with that argument of Steven Pinker's or would want to.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, that might be true, right? So like what Pinker says is, okay, like, historically there was like a lot of violence in human experience, and there were sort of like these pre-state societies, and violence has decreased kind of alongside the increasing centralization of power, right? Like the development of states and the sort of like growing of the states. So that might be true, but then, that doesn't entail that they have to do all of this stuff like collecting money for social welfare programs and prohibiting drugs and, restricting the guns that you can own and whatever, all that stuff, right? They can just do the minimal thing, like stopping people from using violence and stealing each other's stuff, right? I mean, that's one thing I want to say, but the other thing I want to say is, like, it doesn't follow that there couldn't be alternative institutions that might be even better. So like, going back to the way things are in primitive societies is no good, right? If we just like, dismantle everything and go back to living as primitive tribesmen, that's terrible. There's like, violence all over the place. Okay, but I think it is like, it's not silly to think that there could be alternative institutions that would take over the functions of the government. And in other words, you might be able to privatize the police functions. This is something I've been sort of like advocating recently after the George Floyd protests, that we should privatize the police.
Okay.
Right, meaning there should be multiple competing security guard companies, and maybe each neighborhood or each apartment building or whatever could decide who provides security for them, right? It's important that there be competition, because like that's the key to how capitalism works, and like how the market winds up producing better results than government provision. Because part of the problem with the police is they have this monopoly, right? Like, so it is true that they stop a bunch of criminals, right? It's like, I think there would be more crime if we just like eliminated the police and had nobody providing security. There would be like a lot more crime. That's true, but also the fact that they have the monopoly means that they can like, get away with stuff. They can like, abuse people and not do a very good job. They don't catch most criminals, by the way, right? Like the vast majority of crimes go unsolved. They don't even claim to have solved them, right? And it's partly because if you don't like the job the police are doing, you have no alternative. It's like you can't like go and hire the other police department because they have the monopoly, right? Mm-hmm. And in fact, if crime gets worse, the police usually get more funding, because like if there's a crime wave, then the mayor or whoever is going to say, wow, I'm going to give more funding to the police department to deal with the crime, right? Okay, which kind of makes sense, but also notice that it has the result that they have no incentive to do a good job. Like they would have the incentive to let crime get worse because they're going to get paid more, right? And like that's the opposite of the way things usually work with private companies. So anyway, that was something of a digression, but like there's something true.
You, Karen, sorry.
So there's something true that like there's true points that Pinker is making, right? But I think he hasn't compared to the sort of privatized, capitalist policing alternative, right? Because that hasn't been tried yet.
So some people would say that when we look at things like, say, the internet and kind of monopolies for which is in theory this kind of libertarian thing, but then when we see the way that certain companies have kind of developed a monopoly over it and how they've exploited it to increase their profits in perhaps immoral ways, that how could we avoid the same kind of things with like private police forces without some kind of central regulation? Or so if one local community decides it doesn't like black people, so they're going to have a racist police force, say, or if one police force has a monopoly over the whole thing and you don't really get a choice anyway due to the way the market plays out, are there things built into that kind of libertarian vision which could prevent that kind of monopoly or prevent
I mean, so there are a couple of points that you raised there, like about the racist police department. did you know that we have that actually in the status quo?
Yes,
Like
it's
what
a
happened?
bit different in the UK. Obviously, not there's still racists and things, but I think compare those problems that you've got in especially the South of America are like whoa, like compared to.
But yeah, so I mean, if you have a society that's full of bad people, then you get bad results, right? So like, yeah, in the market, if there's like this huge agreement of consumers that they want something bad, then they're going to get it. That's the same as with democratic government, though, right? It's like, don't think that you're getting away from that by just having them. They're just going to vote for the bad thing if they have democratic government. But actually, the market mechanism is usually better because there are incentives for people to pay attention and like to think and do research on the products before they buy them. Because in the market, typically, the result of your learning about the products is you get the one that you prefer, which means if you learned a lot about it, then you typically get the one that's best, or something like that, or at least not a terrible one. There's no such incentive with voting. Because if you do a lot of research and you figure out which politician is best, you do not then get that politician. You still get what the majority of people voted for. And there are millions of voters, so the probability of you're changing the outcome is like, negligible. But okay, so I think I digressed and I didn't answer your main question.
Just the question just then, sorry, or was there a question before, like that was nested within? That was my mind's gone because I was looking at some of the questions coming in on the chat.
Yeah. No, yeah. So you're talking about something else and then mentioned, what if they start this racist police department? And then, saying some other stuff.
So yeah.
Oh yeah. No, it was stuff about monopolies, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So here's an argument. Okay, we need to stop monopolies from developing. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to start a big monopoly, right? And then that monopoly is going to be able to protect us from all of the other ones, right? Why do you not think that the big monopoly, that's the government, okay? Why do you not think that they're going to do the bad things that monopolies do that you don't like, right? And actually the thing is, it's not just that then you have a monopoly and it's doing bad stuff, but it's preventing all the other monopolies. No. Because when you establish this one monopoly, it uses its power to give monopolies to other people, right? Like the main way that a monopoly gets established in a market economy is the government does stuff. The government passes laws. So you get a politically influential business, and then it just lobbies the government to get laws that drive out its competitors or something like that. That's actually the best way of developing a monopoly if you can. Now, why would there not be a natural monopoly in the protection industry? There can be such a thing as a natural monopoly, and this happened with like Microsoft and the Windows operating system. But the reason why that's a natural, so by natural monopoly, I mean it doesn't require the government to come in and establish it. It just happens by market forces. Okay, but the reason that was a natural monopoly is basically it's a network good. As the operating system, the value of it depends upon how many other people have it. So people want an operating system that a bunch of other people have. If other people don't have it, it's like way less good. Okay, but so that's why that particular thing develops into being super dominant. Although it's not a monopoly because there's still Apple. All right. But anyway, well, there's nothing like that in the protection industry, right? Like it's not like you have to have the same security guard that other people have, or the same security guard company that other people have, right? It's not like your security guard won't be any good if he's not the same as the company that other people are using, right? Now there are other reasons why you get large companies are if there are very large fixed costs in an industry, then that favors larger industries, right? So fixed costs are costs that you have to take up front in order to like just start the business. Or in order to kind of like have the most efficient production method or something like that. Okay, so like if you have to build a big expensive factory in order to be in the business, then that favors large companies. But there's also nothing like that in the security industry. There's not like huge upfront fixed costs, right? So there's not really a reason why by natural market forces, there would be very large companies. There would probably be a very large number of small companies.
Okay, just looking through the questions that have come in then. Maybe a last one on the kind of political side, where someone's saying governments and authoritative hierarchies are a universal phenomenon. Isn't the simplest explanation that as a collective species, we need such institutions to ensure order?
Is that the simplest explanation? I don't know. It's fairly simple, but not true. So here's another explanation. Some people like to dominate and exploit other people for their own good. Like that's why we have governments, right? Is that a simpler? I don't know if that's a simpler explanation, but I think that's more consistent with what we know about human nature, right? There's the reason why most people are doing things is self-interest, not the interests of society. And I think that goes for people in government too. They're ruling for their own sake, not for the sake of the rest of us. Okay, now there's still a point though, like, yeah, governments have evolved everywhere. Does that mean that they're inevitable? I mean, that might be true, but it's not like obvious that it's inevitable, right? So there are things that used to be everywhere that are no longer, right? So slavery used to be very widely practiced. It wasn't everywhere, but it used to be very widely practiced. And now it's abolished everywhere in the world. So like you can have dramatic shifts in social institutions. It also used to be that dictatorship was basically universal, right? Before the 19th century, basically every country was a dictatorship, as we would today describe it. Like there were no real serious democracies. And now today, about half the world are democracies. And that's striking, like that is a quick change because like for most of human history, it's like thousands and thousands of years of no democracy. And then suddenly democracy comes. And it's now plausible to say that it's going to take over the whole world. Okay, so that is actually a fairly radical shift. And if you talk to people a few hundred years ago, they would have thought democracy is unworkable, right? And like, an obviously crazy pipe dream or whatever. Okay, so anyway, so that doesn't show that, anarcho-capitalism is feasible. That's just to say the mere fact that we don't have it now that doesn't show that it can't be done, right? There have been radical shifts. So.
There was a question someone asked about pet owning from a vegan perspective. So is it immoral on your view to own pets in the same way it is to farm animals just for like chickens just for the eggs or whatever?
So I don't think so. So I mean, I take it that your pets have a reasonably good life, right? Like, provided you're not torturing your pets, right? Because my main thing is don't torture other beings, don't cause great pain and suffering. I know there are some people who worry about pet ownership because I don't know, they think it's like enslaving the pet or something. But it's like a happy alleged enslavement, right? Like providing free food for the animal or whatever. And thing is, I believe that the animals experience pleasure and pain or suffering and enjoyment, but I don't believe that they're aware of these things that I don't believe they have these ideas of, oh, you're interfering with my autonomy and you're not recognizing me as a full human being or full whatever being. I don't think that they worry about stuff like that. I don't think that they think, oh, you're acting like you're superior to me. I need equal status. You can't say that you own me, unless I get to own you or whatever. I don't think that the animals care about any of those things. So I kind of don't really think those things matter, right? I think that, pain and suffering matters.
What do you think, by the way, as a definition of the good philosophically, which is it's kind of over the past year or so become popular amongst some kind of internet atheist communities as involuntary imposition of will as a definition of what is bad. And so the best possible world would be a world where you could do whatever you wanted without any kind of consequences. Or do you think that could be a plausible route to go down for defining good and bad, or are there some kind of obvious things that stick out to you in that?
Yeah,
it's quite libertarian sort of in its.
That's right. Yeah, that might be sort of like an excessive libertarian view, right? Like, okay, the only bad thing is other people imposing their will on you. Oh, really? So like if you get cancer, that's not bad, right? Like, unless somebody gave you cancer. No, that's wrong, right? There's lots of stuff that's bad. That's not somebody imposing their will, right? Like, bad stuff happens just naturally, right? By natural causes. And, similarly for good stuff. Also, like, enacting your will isn't always good. I mean, like, it might be true that there's always something good about it. Like, if you get to do what you want, you satisfy a preference, and that's good. But it's not the case that it's always sort of overall good, right? Like, what if you have a really bad preference, right? I don't think that there's a definition of good. And also, I think if you have like if you have a very monistic view where you try to say the one thing that's good and the one thing that's bad, you're probably vastly oversimplifying. There's probably more than one thing that's good, right? Like enjoyment is good, but also, like justice is good and freedom is good and whatever. Honor is good and so on.
So I've got one last question from the chat then, if that's okay. Where someone has asked, so like in a world with community private police, what stops me from getting away with robbing a house by leaving the territory of the local security force?
Yeah. Somebody might hire an investigator to investigate the crime. Or wherever you go, there might be security there. They might have agreements. The security guard, in your neighborhood, the security company in your neighborhood might have agreements with the security companies in other neighborhoods, right? And so they might extradite you. If there's a chance of getting back the property, then the property owner might pay somebody to go investigate and find you and bring you back.
Okay, so thank you for coming on and having this conversation with me, kind of at random. I appreciate your time. Is there anything you want to say if people want to kind of reach out to you, or anything you want to promote while you're on here for people?
Well, I would suggest people can look up my website or my blog. I have a blog called Fake News, FAKENOUS.net. And also I have a website that you can look at where some of my papers and stuff are posted, which is owl232.net.
And I'll put those in the description as well for anyone who's interested. Yeah, so thank you for coming on. Thank you for your time, and I'll leave you to it now. Yeah, thanks for that.
Okay, thanks for having me. It's been fun.
Cheers. Bye.